Hello, everyone. Welcome to Google. We're very excited to have you here. My name is Eyal, and I'm an engineering director here in New York, working in the ad space. And we have an exciting program for you this evening, highly interactive. So everyone is going to have time for questions, and we look forward for that. So I'll say a few words about today. This is kind of our very rough agenda, but one of the cool things in what we do, and speaking on behalf of four of us here, we work on the ads side of Google, which in my view is extremely interesting and challenging. And the reason it's challenging to me is because it combines a lot of computer science, from machine learning to distributed systems, and auction theory, game theory, and much more, with bringing economical value and economical formulas to the web, making the web better and richer for everyone, and keeping the web open and free. And we're going to talk about it more soon. Personally, I've been here about 4.5 years in Google New York. I started as a software engineer, building one of the ideas we had at the time called the ad exchange, and it became successful, and that has been a thrilling and gratifying ride for me. And with that, I think I'm going to pass it on to Jacob, who is leading a big part of our ad serving. Just to understand what ad serving is, think about all the users in the world looking into websites, trying to get the best content, and then everything has to come to some server in real time, and fast is better than slow, right? So we care a lot about latency, and we try to improve, and this is what the team does. With that, I'll hand it off to Jacob.
Thanks, Eyal. Just going to load up the presentation here. So, we're going to be talking about Ad Exchange, which Eyal mentioned. It was his project when he came into Google, and he's still all of our boss. So let's talk about, first of all, why this is important, what we do, which Eyal touched on as well. So what's the point of having an ad exchange? Well, imagine you're a newspaper company. Imagine you're, say, the New York Times or the Washington Post. Over the last 10 or maybe even 20 years, people have increasingly been looking at your content, the stuff that you pay your reporters and so forth to write. They've been looking at it all increasingly online instead of in their newspapers. And for some reason, they expect to get it for free. So you have to make sure, as someone who's publishing content on the web, we call these people publishers, just as we do offline, we have to make sure that they can get enough money to support their business, to support the website that all of their visitors are coming to pay for. So particularly as all of these people shift their business online, it's been really a struggle in the very new space of online advertising. In the grand scheme of the economy, this is an unbelievably new industry, to make sure that these publishers can monetize their websites effectively, that they can get the money that they need to build the websites from advertising. Otherwise, they'd have to find the money another way, or they wouldn't be able to have their website. So what we really look at our job as is keeping the web free. We have to make online advertising as easy and effective as possible in order for these content providers, these publishers, to make a living so that the web keeps on going as the wonderful free, mostly free to consumers medium we know today. And that's really what we're trying to do. So to discuss how Ad Exchange does this, the way that we're trying to make the online advertising world better, first, let's talk about how ads get to where they are. If you go to a website today, YouTube say, and you see an ad in the screen, where did that ad come from? How did they decide to show you that ad and not a different ad? Well, initially, people had these systems called ad servers, and the ad server was a server that sat in a data center somewhere, and when you loaded the page, the ad server would get called and it would pick an ad to show, and the ads that it picked to show were mostly ads from advertisers who talked directly to the publisher, to the person who owned the website. Someone may even have picked up the phone and said, hey, Would you like to show my ad? How much would that cost me? They probably, the actual ad itself, which we call in the industry for some reason the creative, they would have maybe even emailed to the publisher, and the publisher put it in this ad server. So the ad server made all of the decisions. But as you can tell, that model doesn't really scale. If you want to show ads on dozens or hundreds of sites across the internet, that's a lot of phone calls. That's a big staff you have to have. And as a publisher, if you want to manage to sell all of your ad space through these deals, then again, that's a lot of dinners you're taking advertiser sales reps out on. So along came these companies called ad networks. And ad networks, what they did is they represented a lot of advertisers. And then they would go to the publisher and say, you don't need to make a deal with me in advance. Just whenever you have some ad space that you want to show an ad on, give me a call. And we'll try and find an advertiser for you, and we'll pay you what we can get, minus some fee. And so this was their business model, and publishers like that because it's good to have somewhere to go, no matter what, who can maybe give you some money. In fact, publishers liked it so much that there were lots of different ad networks. And if there's lots of different ad networks, as a publisher, if you're only working with one, you feel like a sucker, because think about the money you're leaving on the table by not working with all of them and picking the best one at any given time. So what happened was that publishers ended up working with lots of these ad networks, and also so did advertisers, so that they can make sure to get the publishers they wanted. And advertisers also got technology to manage their interests and to manage their reporting across all of these different ways that they were showing their ads. Confusingly, this is also called an ad server. So as you can see, the ecosystem got a lot more complicated. And it only got worse from there. Today, there's tons and tons of different companies involved in showing an ad, even maybe just a single ad on a website. There's all these different ad networks. There's companies with different names of acronyms like SSPs, sell-side platforms, demand-side platforms, data providers whose job is perhaps telling the advertisers something about the user that you'd be showing the ad to see if that makes them more interested in showing an ad at a given time, verification platforms, which help advertisers make sure that their ad actually got shown. So all of these companies adding value, but also adding friction to the ecosystem. So this is really just kind of a mess, because every single new service that comes into the advertising ecosystem, clearly it's adding value to someone and it's serving a purpose or nobody would be using it. But that doesn't mean that these services necessarily interact well together. And if you go to a website that has a lot of ads and the ads are not configured very well, you can notice it takes a lot of time to load the page. Well, one of the reasons for that is all of these different services. All of them, many of them work by just trying to put some JavaScript on your browser. And if they're all putting JavaScript on your browser, well, then it's going to take a while. So user-facing latency ends up suffering thanks to the size of this ecosystem. And this is bad for users, of course, and also for publishers, because the longer it takes to load an ad, the higher the chance that no user will ever end up seeing it, that they'll just get frustrated and go away. And it also adds a big cost to all of these different players in the market, to the advertisers and to the publishers, because they have to know about how to use all of these different technologies and to try and integrate with all of them. So that's where we come in. Ad Exchange is trying to provide an open and transparent marketplace for buying and selling advertising on the internet. A place that no matter who you are in the market, if you want to buy or sell advertising, regardless of the technology you use, you can come and buy it on a single platform across the internet. If you're a publisher, we try and give you the best ad, no matter where it comes from, no matter which ad network or which company is providing that ad, we try and give you the best one, and also give you a unified place to tell us what kind of ads you want, instead of having to control that separately for every person you're getting ads from. And if you're a buyer, you get to show your ads to hundreds of millions of different users all through a single system that, again, you can configure once and have it work everywhere. So we're really trying to connect online advertising and reduce the amount of friction involved in doing advertising on the internet. So this is really hard. So we have to serve billions of different requests every single day. And every one, we can't just serve it from our own system, but we have to also find out who wants to buy this ad. So how do you think that we figure this out? How do you think, for any given ad, we figure out who's interested in buying it? Well, what we do is we actually call them in real time while you, the user, are sitting on a page waiting for the page to load, we call them in real time over the internet. And how long do you think we have to do that in? So it says, so we have 30 milliseconds to do everything we have to do on our side. But how long, does anyone have a guess how long we try and take to get bids from all of the real-time bidders? Yes. So we try and get it in 150 milliseconds. But in fact, we try and do it, and we're trying to lower that to 100 milliseconds from the bidder's point of view. So we're trying to do 100 milliseconds in a tenth of a second, or up to 150 milliseconds in some cases. We're trying to call everyone who might possibly potentially want to show an ad on this publisher's site and figure out what ad they want to show in the bid that they want to send us. And not only that, but we have to figure out if these ads comply with our policies and with the publisher's policies. And this may be an ad that we've never seen before. And maybe it's an ad we have seen before, but how can we tell? And again, we have to figure out whether this ad is the kind of ad we want to show in real time while someone's sitting waiting for the page to load, which hopefully doesn't take as long as it's taking me to read through this slide. And of course, we have to do this all in an incentive-compatible way. We have to figure out how to show ads and how to let buyers bid on ads in a way that does right by all the market participants. We have to make sure that everyone feels like they're treated fairly, and everyone has the incentive to be truthful to us, to tell us what they actually are willing to pay or are willing to earn for showing a given ad. So let's talk about some of these things more specifically. So this is really the basic question. How can we do this all at scale? How can we figure out in millions of places at once the right ad to show to all of these different users while respecting all of the preferences we get from all the buyers and all the publishers? Well, we have to build a really very global, scalable system. We're serving on thousands of cores all around the world. And one of the big challenges here is how we handle state. So say you're an advertiser. You probably aren't willing to spend an infinite amount of money advertising. Probably you have a budget. Say you're willing to spend $1,000 advertising around the world. Well, what that means is that some system in China might want to keep showing this ad. But in order to figure out whether it's allowed to show this particular buyer's ad, it has to know what all of the rest of the computers all around the world decided to do with this ad. Because if they've all been showing it really quickly, then that advertiser might be out of budget. So we have to take this state and we have to send it to all of the systems around the world while still doing this all within 30 seconds to do budgeting. Yes?
Alternatively, you have to minimize the freebies you give away because you overshot.
Yes.
If you use the mistake by giving away freebies when you overshoot, but you aren't going to be able to charge that.
Exactly. Yeah. So hitting budgets, this is a very good point. Hitting budgets exactly is very expensive, both from a latency point of view and probably because any of the reasonable ways of doing it mean you're going to forgo some impressions. You're going to not show some ads that you wish you'd shown, which is called under-delivery, and we really try and avoid it. The advertisers don't like it either. So that means that we're trying to hit a window, and we might overshoot a little bit, but we try and overshoot, of course, as little as possible, while still staying in line with the actual budget. And we will reimburse advertisers if we overshoot. A similar distributed state problem involves user data. One of the big features that advertisers use on the internet is what's called frequency capping. You say this is a lot like a budget, but instead of a budget for your ad globally, it's a budget for your ad for a particular user. You say, I only want to show this ad to any given user on the internet at most a certain number of times, 3 times a week. Because what's the point of you seeing the same ad over and over and over and over again? That doesn't benefit anyone. But this means that the user state, any computer that you might potentially hit, any of our servers, has to share all of that data about the user, and we have to update it very quickly. Because in some cases, if you're going from page to page, you can see ads in quick succession. And we have to do all of this with very high availability. Google really, as a company, prides itself on the availability of our systems, and AdExchange is no different. We try and do this all while showing ads a very, very high percentage of the time. So maintaining this high ability distributed system is a real challenge for us. And latency, again, is also a challenge. So I was touching on this a bit. But really, to get to the kind of latency we want, we can't store anything on disk. And we can't make any requests that aren't local to the data center. And we can't block on anything, because the moment you block, if you get woken up a few milliseconds late, that's it. You've blown your deadline. So managing to do everything we do really, 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 really fast is one of the biggest problems we face. What this means is that we have to use an indexing system, and we actually use the same indexing system that's used for Google search to store our ads, so that we can retrieve the ads quickly enough to serve a given request. And by the ads, I know that this sort of contradicts what I said about getting the ads in real time from buyers, but what we do is we let them tell us some stuff in advance so that we know what kind of inventory they're interested in buying. We have to figure out the contents of the page. At some point in our system, we have to actually go crawl the page and figure out what's on it, because we let advertisers target based on the page's contents. So how can we do this and still manage to serve these ads in the brief time we have? Well, of course, we have to do a lot of clever caching. So this is another one of the big problems we face. And doing any sort of eligibility check we want to do on ads, we have to do all of this, and we can't store anything on disk, and we can't store anything that isn't locally replicated. What that means is that if you make a change to an ad, we have to somehow get that change and tell every single server that's potentially serving your ad around the world that your ad's changed very quickly as well, which is a big challenge that we've been working a lot on recently. And another one of the things that makes Ad Exchange so interesting is our auction. So what does it mean that we have an auction when we show ads? Well, what we don't do, of course, we're doing this, of course, billions of times a day. We don't go while you're waiting for the page to load and have a bunch of people with paddles go and decide who's going to get the ad. What it means that we have an auction is that we have a mechanism for ranking and for pricing ads that runs in our system in real time. And in particular, one of the most crucial features of this auction is that it's second price. So what that means is that when you bid on the right to show an ad on a given page, and you win, you're the person with the highest bid. And we always incidentally give the spot in Ad Exchange to the person with the highest bid, because we want to be very, very transparent about who wins the auction. To be a market, it's important that everyone feels they're on a level playing field. And the way we do that is by saying we just take your bid, and if your ad's allowed to show and you have the highest bid, you win. So why wouldn't we charge people their bids? Why do we charge people instead the bid of the next person down? So maybe one of you can tell me, what would you do as an advertiser if we said, when you bid for the right to show an ad on Ad Exchange, we'll charge you the amount that you say you're willing to pay? What would it be in your interest to do? Yeah, lowball. You'd want to bid just enough to get the space, but no higher. Because if you say the next person was willing to pay $2 and you're willing to pay $3, well, you'd get your bill for $3, and you'd say, well, why am I paying this extra dollar? If I'd bid $2.01, I would have still won, and I would have saved 99 cents. So maybe I'm going to try and game the system. I'm going to try and find the lowest possible bid that would still get me all the benefits. So even though initially it looks like it would be better for us and better for our publishers to charge people the maximum amount they're willing to pay, if we actually did that, if we ran a first price auction, we wouldn't know what people were willing to pay. And also this would result in significant instability for the advertisers themselves. Because now you're not competing against other people. You don't actually know what the other people are willing to pay either. You only know what they tell us, and they're all gaming the system as well. So we recognized for Google Search, and we maintain that principle for Ad Exchange, that having a second price auction, which gives the buyers the incentive to tell the truth about how much they value the ad space, is really better for all the participants in the market. It's also worth mentioning, if you buy an ad on Google.com, or if you buy an ad through AdWords on the rest of the internet, you can say how much you're willing to pay for a click. But that's not how we work on the Ad Exchange, because in order to run a fair auction with cost per click, you have to have a good estimate of how much people are willing to pay per click, which is a very hard problem. So what we do is we say, well, if you want to charge your advertisers per click, if you're a network and you think your advertisers want to pay per click, well, you still have to bid per impression, which is called CPM, for reasons I won't go into. And then you have to take the risk. So this means that AdWords, which buys on AdExchange, this is sort of our own internal network. They let advertisers pay per click, but they have to do the conversion. They have to guess what the chances of a click, and bid on AdExchange on a per impression basis. So that the publishers know that the person willing to pay the most got the impression, and we're not using any of our click-through rate prediction magic unfairly. So with this auction, like I said, everyone should bid the valuation, the maximum amount they're willing to pay for the slot, right? Almost. We wish. But as I said earlier, advertisers have budgets. And this changes the model to some extent. Because if you're bidding $1 in an iterated second price auction, what we sort of take that to mean is that you're willing to pay $1 for impressions like this forever and ever and ever. But of course you're not, because if we eventually you'd run out of your budget and you wouldn't be willing to pay anything anymore. So budgets kind of change the equation, but overall we found that an iterated second price auction leads to very good characteristics and to stable bids and good results. So we're almost there, except for the budgeting thing. But the AdExchange auction is actually key to many of the features that we implement on the exchange, particularly features for publishers. And we end up having to work with it and figure out what the right thing to do is in the auction for a bunch of the different things, a bunch of the different features that we built. So a great example here is reserve prices. So publishers don't necessarily want to sell their inventory at any price. They may want to have a minimum that you can pay to buy that ad space, because they may have something else to show there. They may want to put in a promotion for an internal service, or they may already be selling you advertising through another system, and they don't want to essentially undercut themselves, which would cost them a lot of money. So we let publishers specify the minimum that they want to charge for any given slot. But it gets more complicated than that. Because what happens if that minimum price leaves some ads unsold? Well, maybe if none of their existing customers knew that they were selling that same inventory for less, and maybe if people who wanted to buy on their site in particular still had to pay the advertised rate, they could sell the rest for lower and it would still work fine. So you probably are familiar with this model if you've bought a hotel off Priceline, and you'll see, you know, a hotel that it won't tell you what hotel it is. It'll say this is a hotel in, say, Philadelphia in downtown, 4 stars for a very low price, but we won't tell you who it is until after you book, because they don't want to compete with their advertised rate. So this is the very same thing here. And we call this feature anonymous inventory. You, the publisher, get to sell your inventory anonymously, just as sort of white label, this is a site about sports, the user's in the US, but we won't tell you which site it is. And that way you can manage to fill a lot more of your inventory without having to undercut your existing deals. And we implement this by having these dual reserve prices. We have a branded reserve price for people who care about showing on your particular site, and an anonymous reserve price for everybody else. But this has big auction implications, because all of a sudden, what happens if you, the top bidder, have to pay at least $3 because you're buying branded, but the second place guy who is buying anonymously is only $1.50? What are we going to charge you? Are we going to charge you $3 or $1.50? So actually what we do is we charge the maximum of the reserve price in the second price. Because really, the reserve price functions kind of as a bid. This is a price that the publisher is willing to buy the inventory back from you. And so from an auction theory perspective, this ends up being the right thing to do. And in fact, reserve prices are a really big control that we have, because it lets publishers decide what they think people should pay for their inventory. It's a big tool that lets them control what kind of ads they show. Maybe they think expandable ads are really annoying to their users, and so they want to charge a higher price if anyone wants to show an expandable ad. Maybe they want to charge a higher price to certain buyers who they know are really interested in buying their inventory. But with all these reserve prices, how does the publisher get any sense of what number to put in, what the right reserve price is to set? And we have a really interesting feature for that. And so I'm going to turn it over to Nemo here, who's going to tell you how publishers set their reserve prices and what tools we give them for that.
Thank you, Jacob. So I'm going to talk, as Jacob said, about one particular aspect, but it's part of the general. So as you heard, the auction is a complicated system. There's participants, and it's been carefully designed to have the right incentives so that buyers tell the truth, sellers also tell the truth, and they're happy. And so it's basically it's not a zero-sum game. It can actually, what we are aspiring to is really a win-win situation. When the ad shows, publisher is happy because it was the best possible ad and they made the most money that they could have made. Advertiser is happy because that was the best place to spend their dollars. And of course, most importantly, the user is happy because they got to see that web page and it was free, and also the ad was hopefully a good ad that's relevant to them and giving them some information that they need. So the key here is, so we try to design the system so that all these people everybody is essentially behaving selfishly. Of course, the publishers are not there to give free stuff to advertisers and vice versa. So everybody, but even as they're behaving selfishly, we want the overall outcome to be a win-win. Sort of like a game in sports with, if you have good rules, you'll have a good game, and it will be entertaining, and both parties that are playing the game will be happy they played. So making it a second price auction solves the bulk of that problem, but there's still room for strategy. So one example of strategy is buyers. We say, okay, according to these rules, in theory, you should bid your true value. Well, what's my true value? It depends on what you tell me about what this thing is worth. So, for example, if I'm an advertiser for a product that's offered or a service that's offered in New York, maybe I don't want to waste and I want to advertise on, let's say wallstreetjournal.com. I don't want to waste my money when a person who's in Germany is going to wallstreetjournal.com, because they'll show an ad, it'll be for a local business in New York, is totally irrelevant to them. So if we give the buyers more information that helps them determine how much this thing is really worth, then that will help them bid truthfully and get the best value. Similarly, as Jacob mentioned, you may have the right value and it may be a great deal for you, but maybe if you're selling potatoes in New York and, it makes sense to bid 50 cents to show your ad for potatoes, maybe you don't have $1 trillion to spend on potatoes, but you have, 2 trillion users coming to that website. Well, some of them from other planets. So. Similar, so the buyers have to have strategy. Budget is one of them. Sellers also have to have strategy. And as Jacob mentioned, it's basically they have to decide at what price am I not willing to sell this product, which is this impression. So just to get a quick idea, how many people have heard the term reserve price in an auction? Okay, great. So about half. So it's basically the floor price. For the other half, it's essentially, say you're selling your house, and hopefully it's not a foreclosure, but let's say it's an auction. And you're saying, well, I'm willing to sell it at whatever price is possible, but if it drops below a certain level, I might be willing to just keep the house and rent it out instead of selling it, because that makes more sense when you're below a certain price. So you'd put that floor price. So essentially, here it's the same thing with the impressions. The publisher may say, well, if it really drops below a certain level, maybe I'm better off just serving the page with no ad, and the user will just see a page with only the content and no ads. Or if I have some other advertiser, like we heard before from ad networks or for some other source that I have an opportunity that I could have sold it somewhere else, I don't want to sell it below that price, because if I can't get that price in the auction, I want to go and get that other value somewhere else. So that's called the channel conflict. So there are many reasons for setting floor prices, and what we do, we design the auction, but we also try to help both sides be smart about how they're playing this game. So we provide tools, suggestions, and automated strategies. So once in a while, when we design these features, we have to sort of put on the publisher hat or the buyer, the seller or the buyer's hat, and say, well, if I was a buyer and I had, all the power of Google's computers and algorithms and so on, how would I use that to do better? And we try to create these strategies for both sides. So I'm going to talk specifically about how the strategy for the seller of how to set the reserve price. So as I mentioned, the buyers are very different. As Jacob mentioned, there's different buyers who may have different reasons for valuing that impression. So when I go to, WSJ.com, some people might be interested in placing an ad because the article is about, let's say the auto industry. So they'll put an ad that's relevant to people in the auto industry. And so if I'm reading an article about the auto industry, maybe they'll figure that this kind of ad is most likely going to be interesting to me. Or another advertiser might say, oh, this is a guy who speaks English, so I have an ad for English-speaking people. Or a guy who reads the Wall Street Journal, so he might have money and we should offer him a vacation. So different users for the same thing, different people have different value, and there can be big differences between these values. So sometimes the publisher, if they don't set a floor price, may not get everything they want out of the auction. Like I said, in the case of the house, suppose you decided to sell your house and you made it a second price auction, and the day of the auction, maybe you didn't advertise it well on the newspaper, and one person shows up, and he bids $1, and he takes your house for $1. Obviously, you wouldn't want that, right? So there are good reasons to say, well, I need a floor price in my auction. So what we do is we say, let's look at history, let's see how much we can learn, and advise them to give them the best possible floor price. And it has to be optimal for the publisher, but again, if we have to do it in a way that doesn't mess up these incentives in the market, because if we do, then the buyers will say, well, the game is rigged against us, we don't want to play, and they'll go somewhere else. So we don't want to change the incentives for the buyers. So what do we do? I will give you a simple example that hopefully illustrates the main idea of how you optimize reserve prices, and also gives you an idea of generally the types of things that we do. So let's say you're a publisher. This is what it looks like for you. So down here we have time. So again, I have a website. Maybe I have 1 million visitors who come to that website every day. Each time a user comes, we call that an impression, or a potential impression and we ask advertisers, hey, who wants to show an ad on this impression? So let's say the first page view or impression, we get 3 advertisers. One of them is willing to pay $5, the next guy is willing to pay $4, and another guy is willing to pay $1. So that's the auction. In this case, we would run an auction. The top guy would win, and because, as Jacob explained, it's a second price auction, he would pay $4. A few seconds later or milliseconds later, another impression comes along with a different user or same user on a different page. And again, let's say you have these two values, $1 and $2, and so on. It keeps going. So over the course of the day, the publisher for a particular piece of their inventory is going to see a lot of different auctions. Here we have 5 illustrated with different bids, and every time the winner is going to be the top bidder, and the price they pay is the second price. So what happens, again, we're wearing the publisher hat. So we're saying, how much money did I make from all these users who came and these advertisers? So in this case, I had 5 impressions. I made $4 on the first one. Again, as I mentioned, on the second one, the price paid would be $1. Maybe this one is a little bit higher, so it's $1.50. This one, again, the $5 guy won, but he paid $2 this time. This time another guy who bid $3 won, but he paid $2. So total, the publisher averaged $2.10 per impression. Great, so that's working. The publisher is making money, and the best possible advertiser is winning. The publisher looks at this though and says, hey, I heard, we don't tell them what the bids were, we just tell them what the price paid was. But maybe the publisher did some research and found out, hey, some people are bidding $5 and I'm only getting $2, So it's like, my viewer, this content that I've created is worth $5. Why should I only get $2.10 on average? I'm going to put in a floor price, let's say $4.50. You could even go up to $5, but let's say the publisher says, okay, I put in a floor price, and as Jacob explained, the floor price is essentially a bid that the publisher themselves is putting in. it behaves exactly like a bid. So it's saying at this price, I'll buy it back from myself. I don't want to sell it to anybody else. So they put in 450. What happens here? Well, they did, they made more money from the $5 guy because now he's going to be paying 450. But these other times, this time the highest bid was $2 and you had a floor price of 450, so nobody won. This time and so on. So here you end up with an average of $1.80 per impression. So that's not good because
given the A, it reserved.
So the reserve price is just a floor price. I'm not sure I'm understanding. So it's
2 and 3.
Yeah.
2 and 3. Nobody touched the reserve price.
Yeah.
So the ad would not be served.
Yeah. So that's why in this case.
Per impression. Per impression.
Well, okay. It depends per query. Let's say. So for the traffic that you had five people came to your website. Right? In scenario A, those 5 people generated $10.50. Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
sorry.
So yes, and in this case, you had the same 5 page views. 3 of them got no ad, which maybe the user was happy about that, but the publisher is not happy because they're making $1.80 on average for all this content that they've generated and this traffic that they've attracted to their website. So, and they're the So, yeah, well, that's a good question, but this is why second price auction matters. So as you heard, if in the second price auction, the key property is that for a buyer, there's no reason to bid other than your maximum. So these guys are, this is the incentive compatibility piece. This guy is only paying $3 because he really does not want to buy this space for more than $3. Let's say, again, he's selling potatoes, and if he shows the ad for $3, there's a certain chance the person will see the ad and come to his store and buy those potatoes, and he'll make a certain amount of profit. But if he pays too much for the ad, it's not worth it. It will cost him more to advertise than the business it generates for him. So in this world, the advertisers are already bidding what they would be willing to pay. So if the floor price just acts just like any other bidder. It's like I got beat. I don't even know that as an advertiser, that whether I got beat by the floor price or by another bidder. I just know that, hey, there was 1 billion queries and I won 50,000 or something, right? So I don't know, but it's the same. And the important thing here is that the publisher can't simply change this all the time. They have to set a relatively static, at least in our case, once a day at most, a floor price. I mean, they can do it more, but not necessarily. Certainly, they can't be changing their floor price billions of times a day. So we try to say, well, okay, what would be another type of situation? Well, okay, what if they put in a different floor price and set it at $2.50 instead? Well, here. Okay, first query, unaffected by the reserve price. The winner wins and pays the second price. So it's as if the reserve price didn't exist. Second query, yes, nobody won again, it got lost. But, we made it, the reserve price, raised the price in this case, and here for different bidders. So what you end up with now, with the $2.50 reserve price in the auction, you sold 4 impressions out of 5 possible impressions, and you averaged $2.30. That's good. That's better than what you were doing before. So that's basically better than 0. It's better than the floor price that's too high. Essentially, what you've done is a trade-off between volume and price. So just think of it very simple, like any other product. You could sell more of it at a cheaper price or fewer at a higher price. Somewhere in the middle is the sweet spot where you make the most money. So what we do is we analyze this very carefully, and then we tell the publisher, hey, this is what your reserve price landscape, we call this. So for every possible reserve price that you could have set on average, and remember, this is not 5 queries, say it's millions. this is what you would have, if you had set no reserve price, you would have averaged $2.10. If you set a reserve price of $2.50, you'd average $2.30. And if you set a floor price of $4.50, you average $1.80. And out there, obviously, at some point, if you get really high, you make zero because your floor price is excluding all the buyers. So the publisher looks at this and says, "Oh, okay, great. Thanks for the suggestion. I'll set my floor price at $2.50, and I will make, a little 11% or whatever it is more than I used to make, and I'm happy." And that's the story for the publisher. Now, we output this for them as this is what it looks like. So in a real life scenario, hopefully it's sufficiently blurred that you can't tell who this is. Not just kidding. But the graph is obviously not based on 5 queries. It's based on billions and billions of queries a day. It's pretty much everybody on the internet at some point goes to our ad exchange. So we get all kinds of different graphs, and this is really useful insight. Publisher can say, "Oh, this is where I should set my floor prices to maximize revenue." So there's a lot more details that we have to be careful about, in particular about not upsetting the buyers or not changing these incentives that we've talked about. But that's essentially optimization on behalf of the publisher or seller strategy. And with that, since we're just showing you the front end here, I'll hand it off to Noam, who's going to talk a little bit about the AdX front end systems.
Starting to get really uncomfortable. So hi, my name is Noam. I work on the front end for the ad exchange. And I don't really have a feature to talk about specifically. I wanted to discuss the front end in general and the challenges that we face. You've heard some really interesting concepts, both from Jacob and Nemo. And they're all really great, and they provide a lot of, well, at the end of the day, money and utility to our publishers and advertisers. But they're all run in the back end. So these publishers and advertisers, like they can't hold up a paddle, they can't walk over to our data center and put their creatives in our servers. And so in order to streamline this, we have to create a front end for them to manage their campaigns and manage their ad units, places where they're going to serve ads from. And that's where our job comes in play. So this is a kind of a blurry piece of the AdWords front end. I don't know why I took it. I don't have a lot of slides. Mine's going to be much shorter. And I assume you can all get up to get some beer afterwards. So the challenges that we have in the front end that I wanted to discuss are we want to make it quick, we want to make it available, and we want to make it intuitive. And while those sound obvious, it's not necessarily simple. And if you've ever built a website or if you've built some user interface, you know that these challenges come with their own set of challenges each. And so we have a very low tolerance for high latency. Our goals are to keep page loads under 1 second, and we try to keep our RPCs under half of that. Availability, we said before that our apps and our ad services are available all around the world, and so we want our UIs to be available in those places and in those languages. So Google has an initiative which is 40 languages for apps. In ads, it's a little less. I don't know why. Those people pay money. You should. So on AdX, we support over 26 countries and over 15 languages. So that's another challenge. Intuitive, simple, but functional. I mean, those are just kind of 3 little words that have a huge impact. If you have a passion for user interfaces, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't have a passion for user interfaces, go get some money from the bank and tell me how that experience was. So what's interesting about our front end is that unlike Docs or Gmail or any other application that you use daily to consume social media or or what have you. These UIs are used for making decisions. Whenever a publisher logs into their UI, they either go and check out how their inventory is doing, if they need to modify anything. Maybe they need to block a certain advertiser that's lowering their quality. Maybe they need to change, their reserve price. So every login basically translates into a decision. That decision, at the end of the day, could translate into money in their pocket, their bottom line. So it's very important that, again, the UI is available and that it's intuitive. Because if you make a mistake there, we have to pay you back. We use, so I kind of glanced over reporting, but reporting is a huge challenge for us. We spoke about billions of impressions, and we have, Nemo's team goes and crunches that data to figure out the optimal reserve price. We also have to give our publishers and our advertisers a way to see how their campaigns are affected by certain changes that they make, and they want to get this data immediately. So sure, if I'm running 2 ads and there's 5 people looking at my ads, then there's not a lot of data to look at. But if I'm running thousands and thousands of ads and maybe millions of keywords, and I'm running them all over the world, and I'm doing thousands of queries per second, then that's a lot of data to crunch. And it's tricky, again, from a front-end perspective, to put that information in a very intuitive and clever way for our publishers and our advertisers to understand what they're looking at. So we're not just going to dump a bunch of numbers on them, although some of them do use the API for that. GWT, I wanted to plug that since I assume a lot of you are computer scientists or engineers in the field, is the Google Web Toolkit. It's an internal, well, not internal, it's an open source web framework. It's actually more of a compiler than anything, but we use it to build our applications. So AdWords, AdSense, AdX, to name a few, use GWT, and the experience is, or the experience of using it translates into how fast and how polished our UIs look and feel. And just to end it up, as I promised, it's going to be short. The most important thing for us on the front end is pixel perfection. So with that, Eyal, you're up again.
Thanks a lot for the great talks, guys. With that, you've heard about various technologies and aspects and auction design. I think we'll move to Q&A and take questions. Brian?
So one of the things that you talked about was the second price auction, and the examples you're using are examples that are basically for examples, not a lot of people involved. How many people on average are involved in an auction, and how often is the second price equal across multiple people? When it is, how do you figure out who wins?
So you guys want to, please?
So, oh, that mic does work. So, I mean, I'm not sure we find actually that the number of people involved in an auction really varies. There are some cases where we have impressions that a lot of people want to buy, and there are some cases when really, especially the number of people left above the reserve price, can be very small. It can be even just one.
So yeah, we have to be careful with numbers. But there's one number that I think was approved for public consumption. So there's on average, we mentioned this in a blog post, so I think it's okay to talk about. But on average, is more than half a dozen, but bidders on any impression. But the high end can range up to over 100, and there's a very wide variance, as Jacob said.
As for what happens when we have multiple people who are both the highest bidder, we flip a coin. We pick one at random, unbiasedly at random.
Yeah. The best way is probably to step up and speak to the microphone, and if more people have questions, you can just line up behind. 1, 2. All right.
All right. So it sounds like a lot of your auction theory is geared towards keeping people honest, but you do provide buyers the ability to single out what they're bidding on. Do you have any mechanisms to detect collusion amongst buyers? If there's 12 buyers that are all knowing they're going to buy the same type of persona or the same website content, do you have any way to detect when they've been working together to cheat your system?
So I'll start. So the question, I guess, the other angle to think about it is why would reputable buyers do that? Why would so a couple of advertisers might try to game, but as we've just heard from the previous question, the market is really what we call efficient in various measurements. And we do keep track of our partners to make sure they are legit in a way that they're serious businesses. And obviously from the buy side, they compete with one another in a way. That's kind of the whole model. So we do have some mechanism, some advanced mechanism in place to do a bunch of sampling and try to detect if people try to override their policies. You seem concerned.
Well,
More curious.
I think there's more we can say.
Yeah, there's also the issue that suppose you created a coalition of buyers and say, okay, well, when I bid, you don't bid, so that we help each other out and you get some. It's not inherently that's not sustainable because one of you is going to cheat and then the other guy won't trust them because, as Eyal said, fundamentally you're competing against each other. So if you have made a little, there's too many buyers. Yeah, well, there's always new thieves. So there's too many buyers for the buyers to be able to really agree. Okay, when I bid, you don't bid, and then we'll talk about it privately on the side. I'll give you something or whatever. It's just not sustainable because fundamentally they're competing.
And I think that's a very good question because when we design, as Nemo said earlier, when we design the auction and we think about incentive compatibility and about the win-win-win situation, we want to make sure what we launch is good for the publishers and the advertisers and the users first. Otherwise, we don't launch it. So nothing is ever perfect, but at least we have a very strong attempt into creating a marketplace that matches those guidelines.
Probably okay to mention that we have a pretty big ad spam team that does both proactive and reactive ad spam detection, and they're quite good at it. They have a lot of resources.
And sorry, last thing on this. We do think about this a lot, and we do monitor metrics like auction density, second price premium, how high the first price is above the second price, and also there's a much bigger challenge than collusion between buyers on the exchange. This may be digging us into a deeper hole, but I think it's worth mentioning. Each of our buyers, they aren't advertisers themselves. Usually they're ad networks or other companies representing a bunch of different advertisers. So what if you're a buyer, you represent 100 advertisers, and you know that with very high likelihood, you have both the top and the second highest bid you have the person who's willing to pay the most and the second most for a given impression. Well, it's a second price auction. You're only entering one bid. So from our perspective, it looks like there's just one guy, and the publisher will get the next highest bid that's outside of your network. So the publisher isn't really capturing all of that value, which is really, if we had one big auction, would be there. Instead, it's being captured by the ad network. So dealing with that situation, dealing with the multi-level auction that we have, ends up being a very big challenge from an incentive compatibility point of view and from a keeping everyone's interest in mind point of view. And it's very hard for us because this is their own system that we don't have insight into to do anything about that.
Hi, thanks for a good talk. I actually had a very quick question. Is there any dependencies between auctions? Because when I heard this, it sounded like every ad space is bid separately, but suppose you had like two scenarios. One is you have two ad spots on the same page, and you want to have like an ad, the same buyer get both. Or if you wanted to have dependencies where you want to have a bid for a second ad only based on the first ad having been accepted. Do you have those kind of strategies, and what does that involve in complexity?
So I'll take that, I think. And So the answer is yes and no, and it's a very good question. We try to cater to advertisers, and advertisers may have a strategy to take over the page for various legitimate reasons, or to not show an ad based on content. And we have business rules within the system to make sure they match what they intended to do. So you would think about two very big brands, they probably don't want to show in two different ad spaces on the same page, right? So we have some control over that, but as soon as we launch a feature or launch this ability, the advertising space is so innovative, they come up with a new requirement. So it's kind of a lot of evolution around those type of feature sets.
I'm not going to extend it out, but what you talked about was like ad dissonance. But I was wondering, is there a possibility for someone to bid on two things together as one? Like, do you have like auction lots kind of thing? Is that a concept that's there?
We don't have that right now. We look into it, of course, as you probably know. In the limit, this is a combinatorial auction, which is an NP-hard problem.
So I'll just mention one small case. It's not technically it's not a pure ad exchange feature, but on YouTube, you know how you have the what we call the companion ad. So you have the slot on the page on the right hand side, and then you have the in-stream ad, which is the ad in the video itself. They don't always both exist, but when you have those two, there is a way that you can actually buy those two at the same time. Because you want a consistent experience for the user. So it's a YouTube auction feature more than an AdX feature, but it exists in some cases.
Questions? Can you just speak to the mic, please? Or we can try just, from where you are. Just so everyone will hear you.
I just wanted to know whether or not you have a strategy in mobile applications. Especially in hyperlocal advertising, at a long lat, a certain radius. Are you doing that, or are you planning on doing that?
That's a very good question.
And a follow-up,
yeah.
If you do, like I don't want to come here again. What is the CPM versus regular website?
I'll take a first stab at the first question. So. There is a huge shift happening towards mobile devices, right? Cell phones, tablets from desktop. It's obvious, and it has a lot of potential for content providers and ads as part of that content. We do have the ability to do lat-long type of targeting in general in Google Ads. We are still in discussions. We also have the data at times to target, so the advertiser could target based on, the user is here and I'm close to an X store, and that store is also an advertiser, so maybe we should show that ad, right? Those type of scenarios that could be extremely useful for the user based on all the other targeting criteria that they have. So we are working on something similar. We're taking a lot of privacy consideration into the decision of how to exactly build that type of feature. But speaking on behalf of the larger, not ad exchange, the larger Google Ads, there are capabilities that enable you to do that.
The price, comparison of price.
I'm not sure how much we can say.
I don't think we can disclose exact figures in terms of CPMs, but so in general, the rule of thumb is that the better targeting you allow advertiser, the higher CPMs they get, the higher value they get from the ad, right? And I believe this is more of a personal opinion than numbers that we looked into, that there is a lot of potential in what you call hyperlocal targeting to generate liquidity in the auction and higher prices. But we cannot go into, unfortunately, we cannot go into numbers right now. You should talk to Tim here.
So just to be clear, I don't know if you got that, but AdX does have mobile ads. So So already that is already launched. So if when you get an app with ads in it, some of those go through ads. So just like web pages. So it's a huge area of development, and we do already support mobile apps, iPhone, iOS, and Android. As far as the pricing, it goes all over the place. Without giving numbers, there's reasons why it should be higher. There's reasons why it should be lower. Because like you said, location is a reason why it might go higher. User intent may be a reason why it goes lower because they're doing something else. So, but we don't know. It's early stages.
I'd just like to ask you to talk a little bit about the differences in your model as applied to different language communities. It's like I can't imagine that advertising in German would be the same as in English. There's a very different size of market and different culture. I can't imagine that advertising in Chinese or in Arabic would be like either English or German. I wonder if you could talk maybe in general for what you found. Thanks.
That's a great question. As noted earlier, we're trying to provide a global ecosystem in pretty much every product we launch. Does anyone have any opinions about the differences between markets?
We mostly leave that up to our participants, I think, is sort of the other side. That's one of the nice cop-outs of being a platform, is we get to lay this all at the feet of the people buying and selling in ad exchanges. We give you the features. Figuring out all of the other stuff is your job. Figuring out what you want to buy, what you want to sell, and how much. And of course, we give them lots of features to help them do that. I know from a sales perspective, the landscape is very different in different countries, but so far not much of that has trickled down into the product, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, one of the reasons is that on the creative level, on the graphical digital unit that you see, this is mostly formed by the advertisers themselves. So they would know the audience that they're trying to target, and we essentially act as a vehicle that they can use to target the right audience at scale. So that's where localization comes into play.
But we're also saying that the money model that you described works pretty much the same.
Yeah. Yeah, well, think about we're a marketplace, right? So NASDAQ works equally well for companies that are worth, 200, recent examples aside, in theory, it does, whether your company is worth, $10 billion or $100 billion, the NASDAQ is just a mechanism for buyers and sellers to meet and transact. So and language or the content, the geographic location, there are many dimensions that matter a lot. As Jacob said, we try to give you all these dimensions so you, the buyer, can make the right value decision and come up. But in practice, we have orders of magnitude difference between the price of one impression and another. Just because there's different information and different value for different websites and different users.
What keeps you up at night, either competitively or technologically?
Up at night. So I try to sleep well. What keeps us up at night is, I think, like speaking just from experience. Google has this amazing culture of, and I mentioned it in one of the conversation earlier, to really develop the best system possible. So anyone that has ever written code, anyone that has ever written a system that is used by many people knows that after a while, requirements change, the landscape changes, and maybe what you thought is the best design 2 years ago is not the best design now, and how can you make sure it keeps working? And the culture in Google is something that allows you think you need to redesign the whole thing. You think you need to throw away the code, even, many people worked on it, and build something new and better to make sure that it's automated and running well and scalable. Then we just do that to avoid kind of old code situation that I'm sure you know what I mean. But other than that, I'm not sure what keeps you guys up at night.
Pushes on
That's
Fridays.
interesting.
This is. I'm sure that. I mean, my team has heard me talk about this forever and ever. But yeah, just.
I would add just personally, and I want in general at Google is just the responsibility for this amount of effect we have on the internet. If if we write code that crashes, it's gonna be hundreds or thousands, sometimes hundreds of millions of people will be affected. So it's just the scale of the potential impact, both good and bad, is I think one of the things that really is staggering.
So we have time for like one or two more questions.
Yeah. So my question is about possibly how much statistical learning algorithms do you guys use in doing your secret sauce and your magic, if any, if that's involved in any way? Statistical learning approaches, Peter Norvik's papers.
Machine learning is a big area in everything at Google. Yes.
Sure, yeah. So you'll find every corner of computer science here, from machine learning to game theory to distributed systems.
Right.
Everything.
So it's deeply embedded in what you guys are doing.
Absolutely.
We use it in some surprising places. An example I think I can give is we want to figure out which advertiser is associated with a given ads landing page. So, because as I mentioned, the buyers aren't necessarily the ultimate advertisers. We would love to know which advertiser it is who's actually responsible for a given ad. We use machine learning for that. Tons of different stuff across the ecosystem.
You can use or do you use?
We do use.
Okay, good. All right.
The other techniques.
Two questions. Like one, how do you know like which advertisers are eligible for a particular auction? Number one, and number two, how do you know that you're like notifying them really like at the same time, because we're dealing with like milliseconds?
Those are two great questions. So I'll take the first one, and maybe someone will take the second one. How do you know which ad to serve? So the advertising world is extremely challenging and interesting in that sense, and there is a lot of metadata that either the advertisers tell us or the publishers tell us, or we infer from various things. Like Jacob just said, we understand who the advertiser is, even if they don't really tell us exactly. And we try to validate and verify a lot of the information that we get from an external party to keep the web kind of honest. And in real time, we match the ad that we have, all the ads we have, and all the hundreds of properties for those ads, the metadata, with what the publishers allow us to serve. And that's even before it's going into the auction. That's what we call kind of the contending ads or the eligible ads. And I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
Kind of guessing game, sort of like probability-wise. You can only serve.
There is some guessing game in the sense that many advertisers try to predict whether someone would click on ad A or ad B, right? Which ad should you serve, A or B? So there's a lot of modeling behind that.
Guessing, as an exchange, guessing can kind of get us into hot water from a transparency perspective as a platform. Because if you say, well, I think you have an 80% chance of buying this ad, and I think you have a 70% chance of buying this ad. The 70% guy will say, well, you're wrong, because I happen to want to buy this ad space. And you're unfairly discriminating against me by predicting low. What can I say to that? So we really try and be very, very deterministic as an exchange in terms of who gets the chance to buy what ad space. But the process that we go through of picking which ads want to buy, which we call targeting, ends up being a big, big part of what we do and a big part of all the features that we develop. And as I was saying in the talk, we use some infrastructure from Google Search to help us do this in terms of indexing and querying against the kinds of ads that we have.
How do you make sure everybody has like a fair shot at it, because we're dealing with milliseconds? That's how it's done.
So we do have the latency limits that were mentioned earlier, and the auction is kind of a sealed envelope, and we monitor very closely, and we work with our partners. If we see they're not within the time budget, we tell them, and we try to keep also they're motivated to submit ads as fast as they can. And we're trying to reduce the latency every few months. We review it and see. But we do give everyone the same time budget to bid.
Anonymous on the web is kind of going away. How deeply are you tracking users' purchases? So if, can I, as an advertiser, say, can I advertise to people that bought a laptop a year ago?
I don't think we do it a year ago. 30 days ago.
First of all, there are very detailed policies that I encourage everyone that uses the web to read. It's not that long. And we do not use any personal information or what we call PII. We cannot say whether a third party that's buying on the exchange uses, what information exactly they're using. But we have very strict policies, and we allow users to opt out in multiple dimensions from tracking, and we enforce that, and we innovate on that all the time with the recent.
No, but are you tracking purchases right now to target users?
We are not as ourselves.
We are not tracking purchases. We do have
Websites
tools.
don't convey that to you and have help target ads to them?
They do in some circumstances.
Some do. Some may give us information, but at the end of the day, the exchange is a broker between buyers and sellers, and we want to make sure they use kind of the same language. An exchange become efficient in any market if they use the same terms, and we're a facilitator. But we have very strict guidelines on PII.
I think also something worth mentioning, and this is in fact maybe a big privacy benefit of ad exchange. So you can opt out of all user tracking from all of Google. If you go to google.com/ads/preferences, and you'll see a big button labeled opt out, and you press it. And of course, before we had ad exchange, we could only opt you out of ads being shown by our network. But now we can opt you out of user tracking from anyone who's buying on the exchange. Any ad sold through the exchange. If you click that opt out button, we won't have any user data on you, and neither will they. So now that opt out manages to apply much more globally, and just as we have the benefit to the buyers of only having to go to one place, we have the benefit to you of one opt out will have a much greater effect across the internet. But we do let people do various tracking of you if you don't opt out.
Okay.
Last question. The address?
Google.com/ads/preferences.
Thank you.
Sort of a wonky trading question. Do you see this evolving from sort of this OTC situation or this sort of very curated auction system towards a sort of a central limit order book with like basis stuff like what we see in sort of futures markets, what we see in
That's a great question.
equities markets? Do you see a market of markets, each competing sort of liquidity pools? What do you see? And if you do see that in the future, how do you see that evolving? On what sort of timeline do you see that evolving?
I think that's a great question. The exchange is relatively a new concept in ads. And from the name, you think about futures, right? And in a way, there are futures in advertising. Today, you can buy media in the future at a certain price. But the question becomes, what's the relationship between the price on the spot market and the price on the futures market? So many of us here have done a lot of research to understand how pricing could be related to one another and whether we can expand the market beyond spot, exactly as you described. So certainly there's a lot of effort on the research side right now that is going toward that. Do you want to add anything? Nemo?
I'll just add that, yeah, I mean, that's a great question, my favorite topic. But I would say it's early.
Talk to Nemo basically in 5 minutes. So.
Yeah, but if you just look at it from a historical perspective, the ad exchanges are probably at the stage where, the other financial markets were when they were 10 years old. I mean, and it's evolving much faster, but we're still, the spot market is still new, and then the derivative markets are coming for sure.
Right, the first commodity and financial exchange happened around 1,000 years ago, and then it got evolved in England in the medieval days, right? So advertising is a little bit younger in that sense.
And wait till we get the futures market crash and advertising, when the speculators jump into advertising prices. Along a similar vein, you mentioned dropping your latency down successively. It's going to very quickly get to a point where you're going to have to talk about hosting your correspondence in the Google data centers, because you're going to hit the same problem the high-frequency boys and girls have, that the speed of light cannot be improved. So for people to get faster on the trigger, they're going to have to be sitting in the next rack.
That's
or
a
closer.
great question, and clearly there are a few people who would wonder in New York from the financial industry. To answer your question, yes, and we do have an effort underway to facilitate on bidding on the Google infrastructure, or just using the Google infrastructure for whatever you want, and maybe you'll use it for bidding. But
if you're an advertiser and you're interested in something like that, then you should talk to your representative, and not like a congressman. I mean, like. I think we're out of time, but we're going to stick around if you want to ask us some more questions. Eyal said you can ask another question.
My question is, how do you evaluate the system performance? How do you evaluate?
How do we evaluate the system
Especially
performance?
when you have the automatic strategies. How do you compare with any other system that randomly throw up an advertisement to the publishers?
So we obviously have metrics that we track on the health of the exchange and the health of the market, but essentially we work with our partners, and our partners will tell us, listen, you're doing a lousy job here, you're doing a great job here, and this is why. And we all kind of share a common vision, I think, us and our partners, to make the market more efficient, better for the users, better for the web in a way. So we try to really leave it for market forces to dictate what's going on.
My understanding is that you build a very deterministic system and throw it to the market, and then let the other party to manually
our quality and our speed basically are the best indicators, and our growth tells us compared to our competitors.
Yeah, but
if we're doing well or not.
We don't look into the competition too much. We try to build the best product we can, and we try to design the best product with incentive compatibility and known kind of exchange mechanism in place, like translation of languages between participants, keeping the people honest, and so on. So there are a bunch of exchange-related paradigms that work across markets, and the ads market is just one of them.
My impression is that all you're talking about is for helping a publisher do yield management. So as an advertiser, if I buy a premium impressions, is there any quality control, say viewability, say if I bid on I don't care about the price, I want to bid on as high as I could, I want to get impressions. Is there any quality control, say I bid on $30, but the viewability is only 50%. We're getting a discount, or like, who's going to control all this? Is that the publisher, or is that your responsibility to make sure I get what I pay for?
So I think those are two questions. One, to make sure that you pay the real amount that we charge is actually the real amount. How can I validate the amount that's less than my bid price? So and we do have a way that allows you to kind of verify that the exchange is honest and keeps track of and how much we say you should pay is what you pay. And there are ways that you as a buyer can sample automatically and see if, I bid $2, obviously I'll win probably at the maximum of $2, and I can experiment and see that if I bid less for a certain threshold and map the landscape, I'm probably going to lose. And there's more advanced research that we've done on that a couple of years ago, how to validate that the auction integrity actually applies and the highest bid wins. We give you a lot of information back as a buyer or as a seller to understand in just enough data without revealing third-party information that the auction is needed a second-priced, honest auction.
What about the scenario, say, the ad's not loading correctly, and somehow my impression that I've been on is actually not served. So how's that gonna?
So the way that we solve that problem, and that's a very real problem that in many systems, the ad server thinks the ad is served, but the user did not really see anything. And the way that we do that on every ad on the exchange, we add what we call a view-through call. So we call back to our server for every ad, even if it's not our own ad, after the ad was rendered. So if the user kind of left, our callback would not show, and we only charge if we're sure, to the best of our capability, that the ad is shown. And that, I think, it differentiates us from a few other systems. Does that make sense? All right. All right. So thank you so much for coming today and listening.